this is Shauna Hawk with the Women of Color and Leadership Movement out of Olympia, Washington, and you are joining us for Conversations with Women of Color. And here with a special guest,
Zarna Joshi from Women of Color Speak Out, Seattle, Washington.
So we're wanting to do this interview, and I wanted to do this interview to get to know more about you and what you do. Zarna, tell us a little bit about you and your journey and how you got to do the work that you're doing.
So I'm an intersectional organizer. So I basically work on the root causes of climate change, being capitalism, colonialism, racism, and patriarchy. And so understanding that, and we see that, it's not just one thing that's created climate change, it's all of these things. And that everything that we're suffering is different manifestations of those root causes. So whether we're talking about racial justice, whether we're talking about gender justice, economic justice, housing justice, food justice, reproductive justice, all of these things, on and on and on, we see that they're all connected to these four systems of oppression. And so what I do is I work on those things, and I focus in particular on patriarchy, because in my view, the systems of oppression all ultimately come from patriarchy. And I see patriarchy as a spiritual problem, because patriarchy tells us that we're just a body. We're just a body, and if you're in a woman's body, or if you're in a person of color's body, a black body, a brown body, if you're in a trans body, if you're in a queer body, if you're in a disabled body, if you're in an animal's body, right, you are inherently devalued. If you're in a poor person's body, you have less value than the value of a rich person, the value of a white person, the value of a cis male person, etc., etc. And so when we do that, and when we're made into just a body, that takes away our soul, it takes away our minds, it takes away our hearts, and we then become an object for the capitalist empire to exploit. So in my view, that's where capitalism, colonialism, racism comes from, because if you're just a body, then other people are just bodies as well. That means you can go and take their stuff. You can go onto their lands and take their lands and take their resources and take their water and take their fossil fuels and take their resources and on and on and on, and claim them as yours because your body has more power and strength than their body. Right? So we see colonialism, we see racism, we see capitalism, we see ableism, we see speciesism. That's all coming from this very patriarchal idea of you are only your body. And that is a spiritual problem. So ultimately what I do is spiritual activism, where we have to actually look at ourselves as spiritual beings. We have to understand that every single person and every single living thing is a spiritual being. And if we can understand each other in that way, then we can connect in a way that is much deeper, in a way that it is spiritual, that is loving, that is compassionate. And if we do that, we are ultimately able to work towards collective liberation. And so that is what I do, and that means that I work on simultaneous issues. It means I mentor youth. It means I mentor men in how to dismantle their own patriarchy. I mentor people of color and women about our internalized oppression, because when you're told over and over and over again, since the moment that you're born, that you matter less, you have less value, you were born to please others, when you're told that enough, you start to believe it. And if you believe it, you then put that type of violence on others and retell that story. And that is one of the reasons why one of the biggest problems in patriarchy is the women who reinforce it. And in particular, the white women who reinforce it against women of color and queer and trans people of color. And so these are all things that I work on at the grassroots level, because that's the only place where change ever really comes, is at the grassroots level in communities. And so that's the work that I do. And I do direct action. I'm a vegan. For climate reasons. I was raised vegetarian by my family for spiritual reasons and cultural reasons, and I went completely vegan for climate reasons and social justice reasons, because animals are also made into objects by a patriarchal capitalist empire. Animals are also treated as if they exist for our pleasure, and that their consent doesn't matter, and that they don't have a right to exist if we decide we can just take them. And so that's one of the things that I do. I work on food justice, I work on food sovereignty issues, I work in solidarity with Indigenous people. I work in solidarity with queer and trans people, particularly queer and trans people of color. I work to make the climate movement a safe place for people of color, because we know the climate movement has always been led by people of color and Native people. But the problem is that the people who are in the news, the people who have all of the money and the resources with these giant green, non-profits, are white people. And yet they are not on the front lines, and therefore they have no understanding of how to actually deal with the problem, because they don't understand the systems of oppression. And so because of their own white supremacy, their own patriarchy, they keep people of color at the bottom in the movement. And that's a disaster, because we're going to lose that way. And so what I do is I work on educating white people so that they can understand how to be better allies, actual allies, as opposed to just using the word and not actually following through. And meanwhile, I work on making the climate movement a safer space for people of color, so that we can know that this is our place, this is our home. We should be leading, we should be at the forefront, we should be speaking, particularly women of color, particularly queer and trans people of color. That is our role, is that we should be in leadership.